We will call it to order. The time now is 9:30 a.m. So that said, Melissa, may I ask upon you to please call roll?
Chair Eric Schmidt.
Here.
Vice Chair Andrew Dykman. He is arriving right now.
Okay.
We'll come back to him. Stephen Forster. Brenda Hartzog.
Here.
Gary Hakinen.
Here.
Marshall McGrady.
Here.
Randy Samuelson.
Randy, you're...
You look frozen.
Here.
You look frozen.
Thank you. Good morning, Randy.
Morning. Sorry.
Eric Sandoval.
Here.
And Andrew Dykman.
Here.
Good morning, Vice Chair.
We have a
Good
quorum.
morning.
Okay, thank you very much, Melissa. Let me go ahead and ask now if any of the board members have any changes to the proposed agenda, and if not, I have a suggestion as well. Okay, hearing none, let me go ahead and suggest for the board's consideration that we do have some public comment on a couple of the new business items, and because they are related to our overall code changes, what I would propose, if the board is amenable to this, is to move agenda items 6A and 6B, that we would move those up on the agenda and address those prior to continuing our work on agenda item 5.
Mr. Chair, if I may, Tyler Glaze, Policy Analyst for the Division. I believe that was supposed to say items 4A and 4B. Excuse me. Yes, 4A and 4B. I stand corrected. My apologies.
Okay, just checking. Okay, yeah, so 6A, 6B. I see a couple thumbs up. Is the board comfortable with that? Okay. Let me go ahead and just, if there's any other changes, proposed changes to the agenda. And if not, then I, Chair Schmidt, rule the agenda and order of business approved with the amendment to move agenda items 6A and 6B before agenda item 5. Okay, next order of business is a review of the draft meeting minutes from January 26th. We open it up to the floor for any comments or edits or questions around the minutes from January 26th. And while you're just thinking that through, let me just take a moment and express our appreciation to BCD staff and Melissa for her work in being able to turn these around so quickly. So really appreciate those efforts.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Okay, any questions, comments about the proposed minutes? I see none. I, Chair Schmidt, now rule the draft minutes of January 26th, 2022 as final. Okay, next item is covering the date of our next meeting. Our official next meeting is scheduled for May 4th, 2022. However, again, as may have mentioned before we went live on this meeting, we have time set aside on February 9th next week, should we not be able to complete our business of going through the code change recommendations today. But assuming we do, and I hope we are able to, then our next meeting would be May 4th, 2022. Okay, any questions on that? All right, next item, public comment. Let me check in with Tyler Glaze on any public comment, and please, Tyler, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Tyler Glaze, Policy Analyst for the Building Codes Division. Mr. Chair, we did not have anyone signed up for general public testimony. However, I do want to ask for the record if anyone is connected today who wishes to make a general public comment. I am not hearing anyone, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you, Tyler. Appreciate that. All right, we will move to the next item on the agenda under program updates and reports. And let me check in with Tony Rocco.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. For the record, Tony Rocco with the division. Not much for a program update as we just met last week. We look forward to continuing to work through the OSSC review. And as always, I'm happy to answer any board questions. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Tony. Appreciate your continued work and support. All right, next item on the agenda is communications. I'm not seeing anything on the agenda under communications. Unless, again, let me turn it over to any BCD staff or Ms. Cox as the administrator. Is there any general updates? Okay, all right, thank you very much. All right, good to see you. Okay, let's go ahead and move into agenda item 6A. This is a board review and approval of a work group to discuss and make recommendations regarding the Broan Nutone proposal, OSSC 22-04 for the 2022 Oregon Structural Specialty Code. Tyler, let me turn it over to Tyler to please introduce the item, and also appreciate Mark Heizer being here with the division.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If you take a look at your packets in your, take a look at your board packets, you'll notice that there is a memo included down near the bottom for agenda item 6A that we have moved to the beginning of this board meeting here today. This is about a public proposal that we have pulled out to discuss, pulled out of the matrix to discuss individually, submitted by Broan Nutone, and we have several technical advisors here who are able to provide far more detail than I can on this issue.
Okay, thank you, Tyler. Good morning, Mark.
Good morning. Thank you, Chair Schmidt and the rest of the board. My name is Mark Heizer. I'm with the division as the Mechanical and Energy Code Engineer. As you've noted in the memo, the division is outlining some of the issues that would arise from the adoption of the proposed language in proposal OSSC 2204. The current code ventilation requirements have left natural ventilation being set under the building code. And this is, of course, tied to the operable openings in the structure. So that's why it's over in the it's been left in the structural code. Then once you selected a path to go with mechanical ventilation, you went to Chapter 4 of the Oregon Mechanical Specialty Code, where it sets the mechanical ventilation requirements based on the building type and occupancies and uses and density of occupants. Currently, all buildings can use the natural ventilation path. This change would require mechanical ventilation for dwelling units. It's a rather complex issue that involves multiple boards, not just the Building Code Structures Board. It also goes over to the apartments covered by the Residential and Manufactured Structures Board, the Energy Board, and of course also the Mechanical Board. So the actions before you could affect not just the structural board, but the mechanical and energy code as well. The language, of course, also the model codes and look at low-rise versus high-rise language. It adds to the complexity that we're looking at, and also just the language distinguishing between application to dwelling units versus some sections that talk about application to any R2, R3, or R4 occupancy. This language is not aligned. One code could apply would require application to sleeping units such as dorm rooms, while the other code, in the other code, it does not. There are a lot of cost complexities involved currently. It would trigger application and addition of new systems not currently required under the model codes. There are a lot of, and once we get into this, you start doing multiple triggers, looking at complexity within both the energy code and looking at the effectiveness of those and also the costs involved with that amongst 3 different boards at least. And so, of course, under current ventilation strategies that we're looking, Oregon has things that aren't addressed in the model code. And there are things of concern that aren't currently addressed that are sort of Oregon unique, such as looking at some of the major smoke events we've had and how to look at control of ventilation during this for people who are in a dwelling unit. We've had a lot of experience in dealing with Oregon-specific requirements in the past for dwelling unit ventilation. We've had work from the Indoor Air Pollution Task Force and the Construction Claims Task Force. Their work led to ventilation code revisions that are still above model codes today for dwelling unit ventilation. So to develop an integrated ventilation strategy for multifamily housing, the division is recommending to have a work group review and do a holistic recommendation to the boards for any revision to ventilation for multifamily housing. Thank you, and I'm available for questions if you'd like.
Okay, thank you very much. And Mr. Moore, I see your hand up, and Tyler, correct me if I'm wrong, at this point, before we get into board deliberation, I'm going to ask Mr. Moore to present. He'd asked for requests for public comment.
Thank you, Chair Schmidt.
Okay, that sounds great. Okay, Mr. Moore, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you. So I just wanted to confirm what Mark had said. There are a lot of things to think about with this code change proposal that I submitted, OSSC 2204, that I'm the proponent of.
And Mr. Moore, could I ask you this real quick? Could you please introduce yourself and who you're with?
Sure, thank you. Mike Moore with Stater LLC, representing Broan Nutone, the proponent of OSSC 2204.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir. So yes, I just wanted to second what Mark had said about the considerations that are involved with this proposal. There's definitely a lot of coordination across different codes and committees there in Oregon as well. So I've spoken with Mark offline, and I'd like to support the division's recommendation here to convene the work group. I'd be happy to participate in that and work with Mark and others to develop a proposal and the components necessary to bring back to the board for their consideration of this proposal. So just wanted to say that today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your comments. Okay, let me go ahead and open it up to, I guess let me ask staff one more time. Any additional comments from BCD staff, or are we ready for some board discussion? Seeing none, thank you, Tyler. So let me go ahead and open it up to the board for discussions and questions. Gary, please go ahead, sir.
Yeah, real quick. I didn't look. I'm sure it's in there. How did the review committee? Did the review committee approve this, disapprove it, or was it split, or were they also maybe leaning towards a separate work group? So anybody, Eric, do you know that, or is?
Well, as I
because you were on the work group.
Yeah. Sorry, multiple Erics. Sorry.
Yes. So let me ask staff, but I think Eric, you were on the code change committee itself. So, but let me first go to staff.
Thank you, Chair Schmidt. Mark Heizer with the division again. The general recommendation was to pass on the proposal to the board, recognizing that there was a lot that might need to be worked out. I think I'll let Mr. Sandoval, I guess, can speak to what was what appeared to be the general consensus was, let the board figure it out. We'll put it forward just in case.
Okay, thank you. Eric, please go ahead.
Yeah. So yes, all those are true. The proponent was in the committee meetings. The committee listened to that, had some multiple concerns, also wanted to coordinate with other boards like mechanical was coming up, pushing it to the board. It seemed like the right answer because there were too many things to figure out during the committee meetings. And so I think that the work group method is one that seems to solve all those concerns and questions. And so just answering your question, what was the general consensus of the committee? There were multiple ways of looking at it. Some were very positive. Some felt concerned about how it might affect the market. Some were concerned about the pricing of the individual pieces. Some were concerned about the smoke that was in there. So basically a lot of bin items, a lot of things to put on the table without any real solutions to them. So I think the work group helps manage that better, because then you can put all those things together and talk through it with concerned people, and then come to a better recommendation to the board. So I think that's the right position.
Okay, thank you, Eric. Good morning, Steve. Want to first welcome you to the meeting, and see you have your hand up. So please, Steve, go ahead.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I just wanted to say I'm supportive of moving this to a work group. I think that's the right thing to do. It appears to be far more complex than this board, in the board meeting would want to try and engage and decipher. And I don't personally know if we have all the necessary expertise and stakeholders kind of in the board and in the room. So I think that'd be the right thing to do is put it to a work group, put out notice so interested stakeholders can participate and come back to the board with ideally a consensus proposal. And if not, certainly we can debate two different proposals or, proponents and opponents of a proposal. But I think that would be the right thing to do. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Eric Sandoval, you still have your hand up. Do you have another comment or just want to double check? Okay, thank you, sir. Other comments or questions from the board? Okay. I think at this point, hearing no additional discussion on this, we've got a couple of options, or a few options, to either approve the request with the division appointing a work group, and we can actually read that. That's one option. Another option is to approve the request that the board chair appoint the work group, or the third option is to disapprove the request to create a work group. So those are kind of the three general options in there. I think just my opinion is if there's consensus from the board to support a work group, my suggestion, or at least my thought, again, subject to the board, all the boards vote on this or motion, is that it would be best if the division appoints it. I have full faith in the division, given that this topic spreads, as mentioned, across many different boards. It might be, I believe the division is in the best position to form that work group versus us trying to do that. So that would be my thought. Gary, and then Vice Chair. Gary, go ahead.
Well, I'd be ready to make a motion.
Okay.
The wording, motion to approve the request that the division appoint the work group to discuss and make recommendations regarding the Broan Nutone ventilation proposal for dwelling units only.
Okay, thank you. Hang on a second. Andrew, I saw you drop your hand. Are you okay?
Yes, sure. Thank you. Gary beat me to it.
Okay. All right. So I'm sorry. One more time, Gary, could you please repeat your motion?
Sure. Motion to approve the request that the division appoint the work group to discuss and make recommendations regarding the Broan Nutone ventilation proposal for dwelling units only.
Okay. Thank you. We have a motion on the floor. At this point, I will call Melissa to please do a roll call for votes.
Stephen Forster,
Yay.
Brenda Hartzog,
Apologies. Yay.
Gary Heikkinen,
Yes.
Marshall McGrady,
Yay.
Randy Samuelson,
Yay.
Eric Sandoval,
Yes.
Vice Chair Andrew Dykman,
Yay.
Chair Eric Schmidt.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, board. Thank you, Mr. Moore, for your public testimony and the presentation and the work on this. We look forward to hearing more as the topic moves forward. Tyler, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Mr. Chair, we do have an individual who did not speak up in time to be a part of the general public comment. If you would like to take that at this time.
Sure. Before moving on to item 6B, that sounds great. Thank you very much. Are you going to call upon that person?
Mr. Chair, yes. Joan Schrader, I believe, had a public comment.
Okay. Welcome, Joan.
Thank you. And thank you to the board who, goodness, has a lot of work on their plates. I'm Joan Schrader, and I own Specialty Family Homes, and we do hourly attendant care for adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And in looking back, we recently have become aware of the change, even though there was a change in the sprinkler requirement. I think it was a couple of years ago, but we're now having that affect us within our licensing requirements. And Oregon's recently are now, as they're subjecting the homes of people with disabilities who require care in their home to a different occupancy classification than the homes of people who are not disabled. So if people without disabilities will live in a home, the occupancy classification attached to that dwelling does not require fire sprinkler systems to be installed. However, people with disabilities and their caregivers cannot move into that same home until an approved fire sprinkler system is installed, because the occupancy classification of the home changes based on the use of the home by disabled people. And that actually violates the Fair Housing Act by making dwellings unavailable to people with disabilities who want to live in a home that would be available to them if it weren't for their disabilities. And so I'm wondering, I'm really concerned about this because, of course, my company, we care for people with disabilities in their homes. And I'm wondering if there are changes that are in the works, or how do I go about appealing, or what is the process? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joan. Thank you for your comments. And I see Administrator Alana Cox on. I'm not sure if you would like to weigh in on that. Please.
Sure, if you don't mind, Mr. Chair. Alana Cox with the division, and thank you for your comments, Joan. So we have become aware that there was a disconnect between the building code requirements and the licensing agencies for some of these occupancy uses. And so we've been working with DHS to kind of see what avenues are available, both to help kind of clarify the confusion. This is a really complicated space in terms of all of the different license types. And then also talk about kind of what enforcement looks like going forward. So there is a bill this session in February that would address this issue by basically proposing to suspend enforcement of this and make it a point forward solution, because there has been a disconnect for several years, I think since 2013. Tony can correct me if I'm wrong. So we are working on it. I think we're trying to find a path where we wouldn't be modifying the code, but instead working on kind of education and compliance tools. So appreciate you bringing it up here today, and we'll certainly update the board on as that progresses. But I think right now it's looking like there may be a legislative approach on the issue.
Thank you so much. That is such a relief to hear. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Alana, and again, thank you, Joan, for your comments and questions today.
Thank you.
Okay, Tyler, anything else before we move on to the next agenda?
No, Mr. Chair, thank you.
Okay, sounds great. Okay, thank you. We'll move on to next item on the agenda, agenda 6B, which is the board review, discussion, and make recommendations regarding the 2022 OSSC Review Committee recommended changes to repair and reconstruction standards under the 2022 OSSC, and approval of a work group as necessary. So at this point, I see we have an interested party for also public testimony. But before that, let me go ahead and turn it over to Tyler Glaze and Tony Rocco to please introduce the item and provide technical details.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Again, Tyler Glaze, Policy Analyst for the division. Mr. Chair, just to clarify, I believe Ms. Crowley-Koch would like to testify about the actual OSSC and a specific issue within that, as opposed to this agenda item.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, thank you.
And members of the board, again, like the previous item, this is an individual item that we have pulled from the matrix to discuss individually. This was a recommendation made by the OSSC Review Committee regarding changes to repair and reconstruction standards. And so if you will take a look at the very end of your agenda packet, there is a memorandum discussing the changes that are being recommended by the review committee. And Tony Rocco is here to provide you more technical details.
Thank you, Tyler. Good morning again, Tony. Please go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the board, again, for the record, Tony Rocco with the division. So this is a discussion and basically a recommendation from the code committee regarding repairs to legally existing buildings after damage occurs. And so when we look at the damage, it's damage outside the control of the owner of that building. And this is something where in Oregon, we've had a pretty substantial history with this specific provision and consideration. And there was a lot of good discussion at the committee level, but it is something that is significant to bring it to the board's attention independently. And the committee recommendation was that to establish a threshold that when damage occurs beyond a certain value, in this case, it was an assessed value of 50% of the building prior to the damage occurring, and that damage exceeds that value, then additional steps would be taken when you go to repair or reconstruct that building. And so here in Oregon, to give you some background and history, you're able to, a building owner has the option to, their legally existing building suffers some damage, they're a victim of that damage, they are able to rebuild it exactly as it was constructed previously. So they have a lot of flexibility in what they do. Now, if they change things through that damage correction, then of course now we're into an alteration as defined in the state building code. And so there would be some additional requirements. But there is no threshold currently. There is some specific, provisions in the state building code that deal with apartments that suffer substantial damage that we'll cover a little bit later. But this is general repair to basically any building, and establishing a threshold where those repairs would have to meet a higher standard during the activity of reconstruction. So I hope that provides background. I'm happy to answer any questions that the board may have on the matter. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. Okay. Any additional information from staff before we get into board deliberation? I don't see anything. Terry, I see your hand up. Is this coming from the code change committee perspective, where I don't have you specifically down for public testimony, but if there's something you want to offer up, feel free. Go ahead. You're on mute, Terry.
Yeah, I'll be truthful. It was me that kind of brought this up to the committee. Tony, do you remember what the vote was on that proposal by the committee?
Through the chair, I don't recall, Mr. Whitehill. I know that there was a specific thumbs up, thumbs down. I think a couple of people abstained from the vote, but it was a good discussion.
Yeah, and I think most of the committee did vote in favor, at least. It wasn't a close vote. I don't recall. Eric, do you? I think it was most of the committee was in favor of it.
Yeah, I think by the time we got to an agreeable proposal, that was what happened. So there was churn before that got it to a better position, and I think that's what we're remembering is that final. Yeah, we're all in agreement.
And if I could make just a quick comment on it, this is something that has always bothered me a little bit because our codes go back to the early 1900s, and by this, I would have to let somebody build something back the way it was built in 1906 or even earlier, which is typically a problem for us. We have buildings with one stair, with no sprinklers, with a lot of deficiencies. And unfortunately, the way the code is written now, for me to call something dangerous and that they have to upgrade that piece of it, our hands have been really tied. Sprinklers isn't a reason for making that call. There's virtually nothing that I can make them upgrade because of the way the code has been written in the last couple of code cycles. So that was the real concern that I have. And you look at the fire damaged homes that just happened in the big fire, and the state let them use the 97 UBC, which I would have no problem with that because that gets you some lateral, it gets you some energy. But I don't have that flexibility to say, well, let's at least bring it up to this part code. And so that's what drove us asking for this to be done. Thank you.
Thank you, Terry. Appreciate your input and comments and work again on the committee on this. I can appreciate the topic for sure. Okay, let me go ahead and open it up to the board for discussion. Okay, I think I first saw Steve's hand. So Steve, please go ahead.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, thank you. And I participated somewhat with the technical committee on this particular topic. It is incredibly complicated, and I concur. I think it does. It would benefit. I think the state, the public, and code officials, builders, everybody, I think, would benefit from this topic being revisited. And I do think also, like the last one, it's complex enough that I don't know that this board should try and sort it out necessarily in this meeting. I am an advocate that it go also to a work group as well. And there's a couple of things I think that really didn't get touched on too much. And one is the kind of the consumer protection aspect of this with insurance. So generally speaking, we work with this a lot, obviously, in fire loss. Insurance companies, generally speaking, are not going to pay for voluntary upgrades. They're going to pay for what is required to be rebuilt. And if you simply require whatever the code was 10, 20, 30 years ago, that's what they're going to pay to rebuild to. Even though the insured may have far greater protection, they may have code, some even put in, upgrade code type protection in their policies. And so that's another, I think, really important aspect of this. Now, there may be, and we heard a little bit about it in the wildfire loss, that there may be some people who don't have insurance. And so this could be a burden on them, forcing them to pay to upgrade. But I believe I've seen data, and maybe the work group could look at it a little bit closer, where certainly the vast majority of structures are insured. So those uninsured type structure repair costs, I think are certainly the rare case, not the norm. And so anyway, for that, and there's a lot of other reasons I won't even get into here. I think it's complex enough. I'm supportive and would advocate for it going to a special work group to try and improve the language. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Eric Sandoval, please.
Support Eric. The two items I like to bring up here that were touched on in the committee and I've seen examples of is that there's this toggling effect of using this 50% inside the committee. We looked at the 50% coming from the our current Chapter 34 or the International Existing Building Code as this toggling piece. And I also mentioned inside the committee that there were examples of this happening in other states, one of which was California, where they allowed this provision not to be included if the building was built in the last 6 years. So that basically allowed the 6-year and newer structures not to deal with this 50% provision. And ones that were older than that would have to deal with the 50% or greater. So those two items of other code examples could help the work group come to a conclusion. I do believe the work group is the right direction.
Thank you, Eric. Other comments or questions from the board? Okay, I'm not hearing any. This will require a motion. And let me just, I guess, before, if anybody's thinking of a motion, let me just offer up my perspective as well. I would agree this is a very complex topic, and I definitely understand and respect everything that goes into this. Being in the industry for so many years, I get the questions, the challenges, what we went through with the wildfires and things like that. How do you build back? And what is that appropriate level without being an over cost burden, but still trying to ensure safety for the occupants and users of the buildings and structures? So I agree, it's a complex topic. I think it impacts a lot of folks in a lot of different ways. And I would also support the recommendation to form a work group on this topic. So with that, let me open up any additional comments or discussion, or if not, I would certainly entertain a motion if anybody's ready for that. Hang on, Terry. I think I'm going to hear from the board first. Gary, please go ahead.
Sure, I guess I'm the motion guy today. I'm supportive of a work group, so I will take that section option, move on the second option there. So move to disapprove the committee's recommendations regarding repair and reconstruction thresholds, which would continue the long-standing statewide approach under the 2019 OSSC language, and recommend a work group to further discuss the matter.
Okay, thank you. We have a motion on the floor. Let me go ahead and at this point go to Melissa and ask her to do a roll call on that motion.
Stephen Forster.
On that one. Sorry. Point of order, I guess. Do you need a second on that or not?
I don't believe so, no.
Okay.
Stephen Forster.
Yay.
Brenda Hartzog.
Yay.
Gary Hakinen.
Yes.
Marshall McGrady.
Yes.
Randy Samuelson.
Yes.
Eric Sandoval.
Yes.
Vice Chair Andrew Dykman.
Yay.
Chair Eric Schmidt.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay, thank you, Melissa. Thank you, everybody. Terry, thank you. I see your hand is still up. Is your hand up because you're going to volunteer to be part of that group?
Well, that's going to happen anyway, but it's mostly, I just wanted clarification. When the work groups finish and come up with whatever the recommendations, how will that be handled, Tony? Would that then go back to the structures board at that time, and could it become a mid-cycle change, or I'm just looking for some clarity there.
For Mr. Chairman, if I can, thank you. Thank you through the chair. It would be at the pleasure of the board. We could have it at a future meeting, do a communication if the work group arrives at something specific, some type of consensus, and then we could get it posted on a future agenda after that point. I guess it just depends on the timelines, with other specialty code adoptions and everything like that. Again, at the pleasure of the board. Mr. Chairman, I'm not sure if you want to specify anything there, some type of goal for us or for that work group from a timeline perspective. Thank you.
Thank you. I think what I would like to suggest, and open to board members' thoughts on this as well, is I think this is another item that I would ask the division to really provide some input in their recommendations about path forward now that we know a direction from the board to proceed. I'd like the division to prepare some thoughts about what they feel is reasonable in terms of a timeline, knowing everything that's on their collective table in terms of workload, about what is reasonable, and then what is that proposed path, and just bring it back to the board for our consideration and information. Does that sound reasonable to the board? Okay, thank you. I guess let me ask Alana, is that reasonable from a division workload standpoint? Okay, thank you very much. Okay, let's go ahead and proceed that way, and then we'll look for some follow-up information from the division about the proposed path forward and how they would propose to conduct that work and bring that back in the proposed calendar with that. All right, thanks everybody. Thank you for that discussion. And now what we will do is move to unfinished business, agenda item 5. This is the continued work on the rest of the OSSC review for the 2022 Structural Specialty Code. If you recall, we started this work last week. We were able to make our way through, I believe it's chapter 5, and we were going to be starting with chapter 6. However, there was one item in chapter 4 that we tabled to bring back and just discuss today as an item that there was some questions on. And I think before we get into chapter 6 and beyond, I'd like to just revisit that item in chapter 4. And I guess, Tony, let me call upon you just to refresh that item and maybe see if we can get that discussion started on that item.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and members of the board. Again, for the record, Tony Rocco with the division. So the item that we're referring to was in chapter 4. If we refer to our matrix in your board packet and we go down, it's on page 2 of 20 within that matrix. It is item 415.11.10. And I'm going to share my screen here. Laura from our team was able to link in that matrix some additional information provided by Mr. Sandoval on the proposal. So I'm going to put that up here if I can figure it out. Okay. So here's the additional information provided. It is a 2024 model code change, and it affects a couple of areas as noted in your matrix. It impacts this new section in 415, and then it also has a new subsection in 1017.2.3, along with a footnote there in table 1017.2. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I think maybe Mr. Sandoval could speak to it if the board has any additional questions.
Okay, thank you. And I know Steve Forrester also had a question on this from the last meeting. So let me just go ahead and open it up to the board for any continued discussion on this, or see if we're at a place where we can make a decision. So Eric, anything else you'd like to add, and or Steve? So please go ahead.
Chairman Schmidt, this is a desire here to make this more organized, and some of the pieces that were placed in this organizational method was the supporting documentation of the time egress analysis, as well as the specific vote in the General Assembly. But generally, it's the same as what was presented in the last board meeting having to do the 2024 IBC. And this is an effort to use the most updated codes that are available. I think that's one of the goals of many of us, because it reduces the risk and allows technology to move forward in a way that is supported by code. So this was a general consensus in the proposal that as these buildings get larger and larger, is there a way to evaluate the travel distance when certain conditions exist? And in that section there related to those certain conditions, there's a desire to provide a certain large volume. And so that allows that to be able to increase the travel distance from the 200 in the table to 300. So for all the ones who don't, all the fabs that don't do this increased volume, they would still be at the 200 level.
Okay, thank you, Eric. And I know Steve, I'm not sure, I know you've had a little bit more time to look at this item, review it a little bit more. I see your hand up, so please go ahead and come forward.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Rocco, and to my peer member Sandoval on putting this together very quickly from the last meeting. So I'm supportive of the technical concept. The concern that I raised at the last meeting was that there was not a clean track change version of the actual language. I know it was discussed in depth in the technical committee, but we didn't have in our board packet the actual sort of language, this clean version language change showing the two new additions in the code. And so that really was my concern more than the technical merits, was that we clearly knew what we were voting on, and more importantly, that the public and stakeholders knew what was being discussed and voted on, so that they had the ability and chance to make comments at this meeting if needed. So my concerns have been resolved. Again, I appreciate the quick work to get this in the board packet and updated. And thank you. That's all I have.
That sounds great. Thank you, Steve. With that, let me go ahead and just, Gary, please go ahead.
Hopefully a very simple question. 2024 IBC is not published yet, but assume this is a proposal, change proposal that was approved by the code committee, the IBC code committee, Eric?
Yes, it was approved as a second viewing by the committee when the additional review was done on the time egress study by a third party. So the final result there at the end shows the as submitted, in indicating that it was approved both on the committee level and on the General Assembly level.
Good. Thanks, Eric.
Thank you, Gary, for that question. So with that, I think right now we're just trying to make sure, can we count this as part of Chapter 4, that the board is ready to move forward, and then we'll move into that we're comfortable with this language? Can we get a thumbs up on that one? Just doing kind of a read. Okay. All right. I think we're ready to roll. Okay. We will consider this one as part of the overall Chapter 4 sign off. And with that, we will, before we move to Chapter 6, I guess, let me go back to Tyler. Let me ask you, from a public testimony standpoint, do we want to go ahead and offer up public testimony at this point, or wait till the very end?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That's certainly at the discretion of the board and yourself. However, I believe it was in reference to a specific item on the matrix, which was solar roofs.
Okay. Let's go ahead, and if Angela is present on the meeting, let's go ahead and offer that up now for public testimony. So, good morning, Angela.
Morning. Thank you so much for allowing me to testify. My name is Angela Crowley-Koch. I'm the Executive Director of OSSC, the Oregon Solar Plus Storage Industries Association. First, I want to appreciate the work of the committee and the board and all the work you've put into these code updates. And I appreciate the concerns that Portland Fire and Rescue has brought forward. If Portland Fire and Rescue has concerns about solar on roofs, then we want to work with them to be part of the solution and make them feel comfortable. Unfortunately, the proposed solution that they brought forward came late and didn't follow the process that other recommendations did, which means that we feel there hasn't been enough time to fully understand the concerns and look for solutions that would work for both Portland Fire and Rescue and for customers looking to install solar. And I should back up and remind folks the issue I'm talking about is the need to ensure enough space on the roof for fire and rescue to operate on the roof in case of a fire. There is urgency to finding a better solution. Oregon is not on the path to reach our climate pollution reduction goals. And of course, we're all seeing the impacts of climate change with longer wildfire seasons, droughts, and increasing intense storms. And we're concerned about the implications of the proposed solution, particularly on smaller homes. Low and moderate income Oregonians have had less access to solar historically, and we're working very hard to change that. But the changes would disproportionately impact smaller homes, and those are the very customers that we're working to ensure access to and make sure they can generate their own clean energy. We're also concerned about the impact of the proposed change on the rest of the state, especially since it is somewhat a last-minute request and other jurisdictions may not be aware of the potential change and the impact that it will have. We are concerned about the large impact that this would have, and in some cases might result in a customer not being able to install solar at all, because if you're reducing the number of panels on the roof, it is increasing the time that it takes to recoup your investment. And especially for low and moderate income folks who are concerned that they might not be able to go solar at all in that case. So we respectfully request that the issue be tabled in some form for the time being, just to allow more time to dig into the details and work together to find possible solutions. It would be good to look at data that exists out there regarding the percentage of solar and roof coverage and evaluate how international code may be different. OSSC is recommending that a work group be convened to evaluate potential options and to make sure that the concerns of Portland Fire and Rescue are addressed. Similar to how a work group was created earlier in this meeting, we feel that this is a very important issue that needs more time and data so that there aren't unintended negative consequences. Because there is a very urgent need to act to reduce climate pollution. OSSC believes this is not the right time to adopt a sweeping new change without ample time for discussion and work to find a solution that could address both Portland Fire and Rescue's concerns and those of low and moderate income solar customers. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Angela, for your comments. And Angela, do you have a specific code change that you're referring to, just so I can flag that on the matrix itself that we're looking at? Or Tony, could you maybe assist with this? Or I see Terry, your hand up as well. I'm not sure if you're trying to point to a specific one of the proposals, or are you trying to respond to Angela's comments?
This is in chapter 31, the definition of adjacent roofs.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for your comments. Let me first go, I think, Terry, your hand is up for what reason, I guess, in terms of, like, I don't have you on for public testimony.
No, I just wanted to respond as a member of the committee, and since Portland Fire isn't here, I can give kind of where they were coming from and why the committee overwhelmingly approved this change.
Well, I'll tell you what, Terry, let me have you hold on to that. If you're going to be on the meeting, when we get to that part of the agenda, let's go ahead and.
Okay. Oh, you're going to wait till we get to that chapter then?
Yeah, I think, but I wanted to hear the public comment, and then we're going to go back.
That's fine. Thank you.
Yeah, so we'll cover that then. Gary, please go ahead. Do you have a question?
I guess it can also wait, but Angela, you made much of your comments was referring to homes and low income, and this is meant to be a commercial code, so there was a little bit of a disconnect there for me, that we're talking about approving a commercial code, and a lot of your comments really seem to be targeted at residential, something that would be covered by the residential code. That was my main kind of question clarification there.
Yeah, thank you for the question and clarification. It's my understanding, and I will confess I'm not a building codes expert like all of you are, but it's my understanding that the discussion is about commercial code in general, but that the fire access pathway section is also used for residential. And that actually brings up another point, that there are pretty big differences in commercial and residential structures and the pathways there. And so, again, that's just another reason why I feel like we need a little more time to discuss that. And if there needs to be different pathways or different regulations and codes for commercial structures as opposed to residential.
Thank you. Again, Angela, Steve, go ahead. I don't want to, again, this is really about chapter 31, so we will get to that. But if you have a follow-up question specifically to Angela.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, thank you. I was just trying to identify which of the proposals, or several proposals in 31, just so I can be prepared when we do get to 31, so we all know what we're talking about. Does anybody know specifically which proposal this is in relation to?
Thank you. That was my question. That was going to be my next question to staff. So Tony, I see you came on.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And through the chair, Mr. Forrester, so if we look at our matrix, it's on page 18 of 20 and then on to 19 of 20. There's several items that we're going to be covering regarding 3111. And it's really going to be the prescriptive installation. So it rolls from page 18 on to 19. So you're looking at 3111, 353. And this was a committee discussion and a committee request for a Portland Fire and Rescue member to come back based on the committee discussion. And this would potentially codify Oregon Solar Installation Specialty Code commentary language regarding solar roof and adjacent roof planes. That was a proposal. So existing commentary language was proposed to be codified. And just a couple of things to just confirm for the board, maybe as a primer for when we get to chapter 31. Yes, so in 2015, remember prior to 2015, we had the Oregon Solar Installation Specialty Code here in Oregon. First state to have a prescriptive solar code, and we integrated that into the body of the OSSC kind of wholesale. And so it addresses all installations. So if we're installing a PV array on detached 1 and 2 family dwelling or townhouse that's governed by the Oregon Residential Specialty Code, we would actually refer via Chapter 3 of the Residential Code to 3111 of the OSSC. So I hope that helps. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Tony. All right, so definitely focused on 3111, 3.5.3 prescriptive installations. So board members, that's the one that we will spend a little bit more time when we get to that chapter on 31. So Angela, again, thank you for your comments today. I appreciate it. And let's that said, let's go ahead and start with Chapter 6, and Tony, I'm going to turn it over to you. I think what we're going to do here, hopefully, is again we're for those that may have not been on the meeting last week, the board is going to be going through these, not each one of them, but we came to consensus discussion last week about asking staff to summarize the highlights of anything that they feel that we need. That they want to point out as we go through our chapters. There's a lot to go through. We have this board approved the code change committee. They've done an incredible amount of work in collaboration with building codes division staff. So we have full faith and trust in the work that they have done. So our role is really to review at a high level. If there's anything that we're seeing, let's point that out, but otherwise we are going through the matrix at a little bit of a faster pace. So with that said, let me go ahead. Again, we're starting with Chapter 6. Last week we were going chapter by chapter because they were definitely more lengthy. I think what I'd like to do is propose some chunks of chapters as we go through this. I've looked at the matrix, and what I would propose is to say, Tony, let's go ahead, and if you want to take chapters 6, 7, and 8, those 3 chapters, if you want to present any highlights on those, anything that we need to be aware of, and if not, we will ask for the kind of the proverbial thumbs up of whether the board is comfortable with those 3 chapters, and then if so, we'll move on. If there's anything the board wishes to discuss on any of those items, we'll do that as well. So everybody good? Make sense on that one? Everybody good? All right. Okay, Tony, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, for the record, Tony Rocco with the division. So before we jump right into that, I just wanted to note that Chapter 2 has been added as a line item to your matrix. Again, Chapter 2 is pretty unique because we often have new model code definitions, we have existing amendments, and really the actions in the body of the code kind of dictate what goes into Chapter 2. And so I just wanted to note that that Chapter 2 has now been added. So jumping forward into chapters 6 through 8, I just wanted to highlight a couple of things for the board. Looking in Chapter 6, left-hand column, 602.4.222, regarding protected area. As we noted during last week's meeting, a lot of the mass wood, tall wood building provisions that were previously codified in Oregon are now being moved at the model level into kind of the body of the code under the 21 iteration. And so it's already here in Oregon adopted. It's just moving location. So you see a lot of that in Chapter 6. And specifically to that item, this was a committee proposal from Terry Whitehill. Great proposal, looking forward to a 2024 IBC allowance regarding mass timber and the allowance of unprotected areas of the ceiling. So a significant increase based on fire testing. So the reference there is to those RISE tests. And again, this is something that is vetted at the national model code level. So I wanted to point that out. In Chapter 7, one thing to note here, 70586, we have vertical exposure, and this is a longstanding Oregon amendment. It's fairly unique because it's really one of the only areas in the code where we deal with adjacent lots, erecting a building on an adjacent lot in proximity to building on a single lot, right? So I just wanted to note that we did some clarifying edits there, some great discussion at the committee level on that one as well. And the recommendation is to retain that moving forward. In Chapter 8, really it's just 808.1, not a lot in Chapter 8 as usual, but 808.1 is going to be a reoccurring theme here for the board's consideration. We have just some cleanups. So suspended ceilings, T-bar, very common, right, throughout our state. And we have a unique approach to it in Oregon. We have a statewide code interpretation that really deals with kind of the prescriptive methodology for installing these and when, additional design is required, seismic design categories, limitations of risk categories, and all of those things. I think the disconnect in code for a long time has been, how do you get there through Chapter 16, particularly 1613 in structural design? And so we're trying to clean that up here on the technical level. So we have a pointer added in 808 that gets us kind of on that rabbit trail back to the applicable code standards. So you'll also see that in 16. And with that, that covers chapters 6 through 8. Mr. Chairman, I'll turn it back over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony, for that summary. Board members, are you comfortable with chapters 6 through 8? Are there any items that you want to flag or discuss any further? Seeing none, we'll do kind of we good to go, thumbs up kind of thing. All right. Okay, Tony, let's go ahead and keep moving. Chapter 9 is pretty long, so let's just go ahead and just capture chapter 9 on its own, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That sounds good. So right up front in chapter 9, on page 5 of 20 of your matrix, we're looking at 901.2. It's titled Fire Protection Systems, and it says modifies for scoping. So some good discussion there at the model code level, or at the committee level, excuse me. And then Eric McMullen from our team did some fantastic work on cleaning up the language there up front in chapter 9. And really what this gets to is we've had some reoccurring questions regarding repairs of life safety systems in what's required there. So we added some language, general language, again, discretionary local building official authority, and then also clarification that if you install a partial system, that it's permitted where approved, of course, locally, but that it must comply with the standards of the state building code insofar that it would be applicable to that partial system. So wanted to point that out. Some really great language there. 90324, moving on to the next page, upholstered furniture and mattresses. This touches several areas of the code. So this touches F1, M, and S1 in regards to the upholstered furniture and mattresses. So just clarification in the code. This has been a bit messy at the model level, as all of you know, for a number of iterations. And so further clarification there, model code changes, recommendations for approval there. 903.242, this is something here. If you note the red italicized language there that says modify by adding or wine to 903.242 to match the language in 903.293. Great committee discussion as usual, on this item. And what this does is it imposes a sprinkler requirement for both the manufacturing, the F1 designation, and a bulk storage S1 designation for distilled spirits. And so we dealt with this at the last board meeting in chapter 4. It was one of those ones that we briefly covered. And the committee language on this one, by the inclusion of wine, I understand where the committee was going with it, but I think there may be some potential concerns that, wine in Oregon is defined in statute, and it includes up to 21 ABV. And this threshold is set at 16. And so this would basically, for wineries that produce a wine higher than 16% alcohol, previously under the F1 designation, they would be in chapter 9 for the sprinkler threshold. It would be at 12,000 square foot fire area would be the threshold there. And we have some very unique winery, long-standing language, for up front in the code in chapter 5. And this would essentially require a sprinkler system for those higher alcohol wines, the manufacturing of those wines. I don't think that there's a significant portion of wineries that produce those wines. But again, this is something that we just wanted to flag for you. And I see Eric from our team has turned on his camera, and at your pleasure, Mr. Chairman, I'm sure he could chime in here and add some input.
Thank you, Tony, and welcome, Eric McMullen. If you'd like to go ahead and offer up any additional context, please do so.
Sure. Thank you, Chair Schmidt. And so Eric McMullen with the division, for the record. Just a little bit of research as Tony was referring to that wine definition in Oregon statute being 21%. There are some limiting factors, although this may take some additional looking into, but just in research in the wine industry, there's some factors that may artificially limit whether or not this is actually going to apply to most of the wine being processed in Oregon. Over 16%, when wine reaches a level at 16%, it starts to actually eat itself. The alcohol actually starts to kill the yeast. So most of the wine we're dealing with in Oregon is probably going to be under the 16% threshold just by the nature of the process, but that's not to say all, and we don't know what that number looks like. There's other limiting factors. When you exceed 14%, the tax goes up quite a bit in Oregon on wine. So a lot of wineries are probably playing at that level for that reason. So there's some other factors that play into this, but it wasn't, I don't know, at the time that the committee looked at this and added that term or added wine to that section, we weren't aware that the statutory definition was 21%. So it ups that threshold. It's just kind of a moving target. So just a little more background on that for the committee. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Eric. Okay, Tony, any additional comments on Chapter 9?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, there are a couple of other items. I just wanted to point out the item just below that regarding substantial alteration or damage. Again, a longstanding Oregon amendment, grade amendment that gets some increased safeguards for specific to apartment houses when they suffer substantial damage or undergo substantial alteration. And that has been moved, as it's identified for you there, to Chapter 34, as it's dealing with existing buildings. And we'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to Chapter 34. And then 903.312 NFPA 13R sprinkler protection. A lot of great work at the committee level on this. The model code at the 21 iteration moved the height associated with allowance of a 13R system, moved it down to 30. There was a 30-foot measurement, and then they turned right around at the 24 process at the national model code and bumped it back up to 45. The committee had a lot of good discussion. Terry Whitehill was following it quite closely, and the committee recommended to align with wherever the 24 model code process landed, which gets us back to that 45 feet. So a lot of additional information there linked for you within that matrix item. And then finally, in Chapter 9, actually, sorry, there's a couple more. On page 6, finally, we have 907.5 occupant notification. And this is something that's been on the radar for quite some time. This is regarding low frequency sounders in this case. This would only apply, the committee's recommendation was to adopt the low frequency requirements for the signal only when a building fire alarm system is required. So that would be, the signal would be coming from the building fire alarm system. So single and multi-station, still, we had some engagement at the committee level. It doesn't sound like those devices are readily available currently, still on the market. And so that portion just above that, 907.4, I believe it's 907.4, I'm sorry, 2 above that, 907.211, you'll see that section of NFPA 72 is not adopted still as it is currently under the 19 OSSC. So I wanted to flag that one. Slight fiscal there as well. And then finally, the last two here in Chapter 9, 915 regarding carbon monoxide detection. We have aligned more closely with the model code in the recommendation to you. And this includes statutory alignment, with maintaining that statutory alignment for Group R, Group I, and then additionally Group E classrooms in specific configurations. And that's been on the model code level for quite some time. And the recommendation is to move forward on that and again, maintain those specific Oregon statutory alignment pieces. And then 918.1, emergency responder communication coverage general. Eric from our team did some fantastic work on this, outreach with stakeholders and industry and the fire service regarding some updates to our Oregon specific approach to this. And that includes updating the survivability standards. Really just some great work. So what we see there is closer alignment with the national model code there. And thanks to the Office of the State Fire Marshal for working with us a little bit on that one as well. And that with that, it takes care of Chapter 9. That's all I have for you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. Appreciate the summary. Board, based on your review and what you're hearing, is there any items that you'd like to discuss any further, or are we ready for a thumbs up to move on to Chapter 10? Steve, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. On the last one that Mr. Rocco mentioned, the emergency responder radio coverage, the 918.1, I didn't see a link to the actual language. I was just wondering if I could take a look at that language. I'm comfortable with everything else we discussed. I would like to just see that language and reserve the right to come back to it for any reason if needed. Is there any way that I could get a copy of that language real quick?
Through the chair, absolutely, Mr. Forrester. I'm sorry that you don't have it already. We'll get a copy to you, and I can also put it on my screen right now if that works.
Yeah,
the pleasure.
If we could, let's go ahead and do that to see if we can just go ahead and cross this one off. Hopefully,
sure. All right. Hopefully, you can see that now. We'll start at the beginning of 918. So we're maintaining. We didn't change anything regarding the application or the scope and the predictable kind of consistent application of this. Really where the changes came in is in survivability. So if you're able to see, I'll try to zoom in a little bit.
Yeah, that's great, Tony. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. So if you're able to see, purple is new model code language. You see this orangish red, that is fire code language. And if you see the different blues, I'm not sure if you're able to make that distinction there on your screen, but the lighter blue is new proposed Oregon amendment and the darker blue is existing. So really what we see as we move through here, we see more alignment with just unamended model code. And then we also have some specific amendments, particularly in survivability. And this was based on the 1221 standard. And so really just kind of taking that and trying our best to make it fit perfectly within that 918 scope that was already established. We'll scroll through some more. And again, our senior building code specialist, Eric McMullen, has turned on his video, Mr. Chairman, if I'm sure he can add some thoughts to this.
Thank you, Tony. Steve, does this help answer any questions that you might have on this?
Yeah, it does. Thank you very much, Mr. Rocco. And maybe Mr. Rocco or Mr. McMullen could just highlight, are there any significant, so I think this is a great change in general. Looking at it just, obviously really quickly here. I think it's very helpful to align closer with the national standard. Particularly since we have so much of our designers are out of state, that sort of thing. But could you highlight, are there any significant sort of deviations or things you had to change from the national language, either from Mr. Rocco or Mr. McMullen?
Thank you for that. Through the chair, Mr. Forrester, no, there wasn't. So we there was quite a bit of committee discussion around the changes in 918.3 for survivability, and really the intention here is, like you said, to align more closely with the model code and then provide customer options. We spoke with some industry folks, just like you said, that are coming from other states that are not familiar with the requirements here in Oregon and want to default to that 1221 standard. And so really, I would say the only changes is just kind of terminology, but getting to the same intent. Eric did some great work reaching out to NFPA, about the 1221 standard, what they intended by some terminology that they use specifically, in there. And I would say that's really it. It's more, we didn't change scope or application or anything like that. I hope that helps. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. So it's Steve, I just want to verify with you. Okay, good to go. All right. I think Tony, you can go ahead and stop sharing now so I can see everybody and just see if we're ready with a kind of the thumbs up to move on to chapter 10. All right. I think we're ready to move on to chapter 10, another long one. So Tony, let's just go ahead and take chapter 10 on its own, please.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And not a lot here, even though it is a long one. A lot of these were just, good model code changes. As we all know, Chapter 10, they like to move it around every iteration. So they move everything. Just when we were comfortable memorizing exactly where it was previously, they move it on us. So just to point out a couple of things for the board. On page 8 of 20, there's 3 in a row here that I'd like to point out. So starting with 1011.12, and then we have a subsection there that'll cover. So if we look at the stairway to the roof provisions, some great work with the city of Portland, engagement with some other municipalities, including Salem and Washington County, various municipalities, Beaverton, I believe, and some clarification about what was codified under the 19 OSSC. So we changed that and removed the allowance at the model code level for a permanent fixed vertical ladder to provide the stairway access in those limited instances, under kind of the code hierarchy there. So that was a good cleanup. We also cleaned up the alternating tread devices and ships ladders. We've had a longstanding Oregon amendment there that was first brought forward by Portland Fire and Rescue. And it's one of those things where it was really great at the time, but now that the code is caught up with ATDs and ships ladders, the dimensional requirements were misaligned. And so what we did is we kept some of those dimensional requirements, particularly for width, since it is for operational response. And then for everything else, just general, rise, run, tread dimensions and things like that, we referred to the associated standards for those accessing devices, if that makes sense. So some good stuff there. And then as far as the roof access exception, great committee discussion on that and regarding the roof hatch, and they changed, so you see it there captured in red, modified by changing the exception language to allow no less than 36 inches by 8 feet to mitigate the conflict, basically to just work cleaner for design community, for customers, for the building departments, and also for the fire service and operational response. And there was a slight increase. I believe it was around $30 per hatch of an increase. So not much there. So good change there. 1015.2, where required guards. Good proposal from Mr. Whitehill, the committee level, and that was regarding occupied roofs. So what we've seen at the National Model Code, right, is that we're slowly getting better and better about occupied roofs, and we're getting that in Oregon here in the OSSC. But there's all these little pieces that seem to be missing, and so this really addresses the intent regarding walking surfaces. We've seen them, where they have maybe an occupied roof deck, but then there's nothing that stops you from going to walk out on the TPO for the rest of the roof, and then there's no guardrails anywhere because you're within from the bounds of that walking surface and that potential fall. But it really captures the intent, again, model code thing there. So good proposal. And then the last one here, just more of a quick summary in chapter 10 for you, 1031, page 8 of 20. And it covers a bunch of items there, but we've seen an update at the National Model Code level regarding EROs, so emergency escape rescue openings, and we added some additional clarifications there via amendments to align us more closely with the provisions in the ORSC. because right, if we have an egress window, probably should be about the same performance and expectations under the resi as it would be in an R2 or an R3, on the commercial side. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll turn it back over to you and your board. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Tony. Board, any questions, comments about Chapter 10, or are we ready to move on to Chapter 11? Good. All right, good to go. Let's go ahead and I just have Chapter 11 also identified because of the length, Tony. So if you want to go ahead and just cover Chapter 11.
Yes.
And then we're going to start. Then we're going to start grouping them up.
Is that your pleasure, Mr. Chairman? Thank you. So here first in Chapter 11, the big thing here is 1102. So if you look at in your matrix, the first line item, and this is basically changing the iteration of the ICC A117.1 standard. It's been highly discussed at the national level over multiple iterations. And this would move us from the current 2009 to up to the 2017 edition. It was first adopted, even though it's the 17 edition, it was not adopted in the 18 iteration of the IBC, which our 19 OSSC was based on. It was first adopted in the 21 iteration. So this is really the first time that we're seeing it. And there are some significant differences in the design standard. Many of the dimensional differences are based on the use of powered chairs versus manual chairs for seated individuals. It is a pretty significant change. The whole entire standard has kind of been revamped. They have some existing building allowances. So if we're doing alterations to existing buildings, there's some flexibility within the standard to comply with those. And then new construction, there are some additional dimensional requirements there. There is some fiscal associated with that. As far as typical designs and standard details, and obviously the size or the square footage that is required for it. The committee recommended approval of it, and we also confirmed that both Washington and California are either in process or have codified it for their respective states. So that would put us in alignment with them. And with that, there wasn't much more that I highlighted specifically in Chapter 11, but of course, if there's anything that jumps out, I'll turn it back over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. Board, questions or comments regarding Chapter 11 as you review it, or again, are we ready to move on? Okay, looks like we're moving on. Okay, moving on to Chapter 12. Let's Tony, I think perhaps we could look at chapters 12 through 15. Oh, I'm sorry. Gary, please go ahead.
I was going to suggest maybe a 5-minute break.
Okay. That sounds great. Is everybody good with that? Okay. Thank you, Gary. Appreciate that suggestion. That's probably good. And we'll see if we can make headway on the rest of these upon our return. Let's go ahead and take a 5-minute break. Let's go ahead and we'll reconvene here in 5 minutes. Thank you very much.
Chairman Schmidt, this is Eric Sandoval, just getting back, and just wanted to let you know that the family concern that I have is that my dad was diagnosed with cancer this week, and so just trying to work with that and try to figure out how the next piece happens. So I just had to take a call from my sister, and so I just was away, but that's been completed. So I'll just go ahead and jump back in here. You said 5-minute break, so I'll be back at that point. And so,
okay, thank you. And I'm very sorry to hear about that. I hope you and your family are doing okay. I wish you the best.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Eric.
Chairman Eric Schmidt, are you talking? So you're on mute.
Thank you. I was wondering why no one was responding. Sorry, my apologies. So welcome back, everybody. Let's go ahead and we'll jump back in. We're on chapter 12. We're going to cover chapters 12 through 15. And at this point, I'll call upon Tony Rocco again, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the record, again, Tony Rocco with the division. Okay, moving into chapter 12. Through prior action, a separate agenda item, the board already addressed the major item there noted in your matrix for chapter 12. Chapter 13, of course, is our energy code in the state of Oregon on the commercial side. And then chapter 14, there wasn't anything major noted. The last item there, again, is talking about EIFS, exterior insulation finishing systems, and then alignment with that statute. We have, I believe it's in the Construction Contractors Board statutes there. For chapter 15, we did maintain existing amendments for re-roofing, specific to the state of Oregon, including that re-roofing inspection and the final inspection language there. And we also have ties back to that language as it is dealing with an existing building from chapter 34. The interesting thing is that the IEBC essentially does the same thing on the unamended national level for existing buildings. They point you to the chapter 15 of the building code provisions. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll turn it back to you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Tony. So we've just reviewed chapters 12 through 15. Board members, is there anything that we need to pull aside, or are we ready to move on to chapter 16? Good to go? Okay. All right, let's move on to chapter 16. I just have 16 on its own because it's covering several things, but again, not sure from a summary standpoint. So Tony, if you could please enlighten us on that.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And my apologies, I did skip over one item in chapter 12. If I could back up and cover that at your pleasure.
Yeah, please.
It's section 1207, and it's regarding enhanced classroom acoustics. And this was quite a big discussion, and our committee worked very well on this. And committee member Janice Sonata, she did some great fiscal analysis on this. That fiscal is included for you. And essentially this would require additional enhanced classroom acoustics when new construction classrooms over a certain volume and size. And it refers us to that accessible design standard, so the ANSI A117.1 for compliance there. There is a bit of fiscal there. And again, that fiscal is clearly documented and attached for your consideration. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
A lot of searching. I found it in emails from last year. 43 questions.
Mr. Samuelson, if you want to go ahead and, okay, thank you. All right. Thank you for muting his mic. Okay, let's go ahead and move on to chapter 16.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, chapter 16, a lot of great changes here. Really big efforts from SEAO and from Jeremy Williams from our program team. Just some fantastic work in collaboration and public proposals and really getting through a lot of these things. The first one I'd like to point out for you is actually just a model code change. And in your left-hand column, it is the fifth item down and is titled T for table 1604.5. This is a model code change regarding RC3 designations and the assembly spaces. And so now there's a specific line item in there that addresses, designates our RC3 for when we have one or more assembly spaces, each with an occupant load greater than 300, and then collectively total occupant load of those assembly spaces greater than 2,500. There's been a lot of question about that line item in the past where it says that public assembly is the primary occupancy. And so this is clarifying that and then adding an additional line item. So that's the first one there. 1606.4.1 for solar ready roofs. This was a public proposal and we worked with SEAO on the public proposal to get us to those provisions for solar ready that we're going to cover in chapter 31. And this is dealing with the load associated with assuming the roof is prepared to support photovoltaic systems in the future. So great collaboration there. It's really more of just a pointer, but I wanted to note that for the board. On the next page, 16082, 16083, 16091, all the way down, basically all of that. Just wanted to briefly summarize that for the board, that there was a lot of work on just tightening up and clarifying design criteria for following, Chapter 16 here in Oregon. So some really great work, cleanup, clarification, some slight modifications via public proposal, a lot of great discussion at the committee level on that. One of the things to note is in 16094 for exposure category, really good cleanup between the redundant exposure category that's listed in the body of the IBC versus that's listed in the design standard ASCE 7. And so we've removed that here in Oregon, and we're just pointing to the design standard for determination of exposure category instead of trying to maintain consistency between, reprinting essentially those terms in our state building code. 1613.1.1, this was what I noted earlier in Chapter 8. Again, trying to clarify that path for T-bar installations, what ASTM standards apply, what is your design path through Chapter 16 through ASCE 7, and hopefully that's going to be great for all the customers and stakeholders here in Oregon as we move forward. On the next page, page 14, you'll see a lot of modifications to ASCE 7. A lot of fantastic work here. I'm not going to cover any of those in detail, but we'd be happy to answer any questions on those. And then the last one in Chapter 16 that I wanted to point out is at the top of page 15. And this is regarding prior action that your board took for addressing House Bill 2605 and tsunami loads. So we had a brief discussion about that. Some basically taking those interim amendments recommended by this board and just folding them right into that 22 OSSC to keep us aligned with statute, ORS 425, 446, and 447. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll turn it back over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. And just for the viewing audience, if they don't already know, when you're referring to SCAO, that is the Structural Engineers Association of Oregon. And so again, it sounds like there was, again, to your point, a lot of great work and collaboration on this with the code review committee and the Structural Engineers Association. Okay, let me go ahead and open it up to the board of any questions or comments related to Chapter 16, or are we ready to keep moving forward for the next chapter? Okay, let's go ahead and keep moving. All right, so we're on to Chapter 17. Tony, I will defer to you. Whether or not you want to group 17 and 18, or if you think there's enough comments for each of those chapters individually. What is your preference on that? I defer to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think we could group. I could run 17 through 19. Probably would be good at your pleasure.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Thank you. So Chapter 17, backing up there, really only one major item to note. There was one that we'll pit stop at in 1705.10 regarding the structural integrity of deep foundations. A lot of great committee discussion on this. There was some just unenforceable, unclear national model code language in this section, and we worked diligently to come up with a solution that made sense to the local government partners on the committee and also to the industry folks on the committee, determining who would be responsible and how we would get that documentation when a deep foundation element is in question on site. How would we get that to the building official? And so just a big collaborative effort there. Great stuff. So 1705.18, I wanted to note this one. Fire stop inspections for Group R. The modification here is that you would be requiring special inspection for fire stop systems in those Group R occupancies when they have an occupant load exceeding 250 within a fire area. So again, pretty much standard of practice based on the committee discussion already, but I just did want to flag that for the board consideration there. Chapter 18, jump into the first couple items in Chapter 18. This is alignment with, again, those same statutory references, 425, 447 in this case, where we have site-specific geological hazard investigations required. And so there's a lot of amendments specific to statutory alignment when you look at our state building code in Chapter 18 right up front. And so maintaining those, And then 180951, this was a new model code change that required frost protection for egress doors, and it had been added kind of in the soils foundation requirements there. Again, a lot of great discussion at the committee level, and kind of landed in an area where it made sense for enforcing this requirement as a base code requirement. And you see that there captured for you in red, modified by limiting the requirements to sites above 4,000 feet in elevation and removing provisions about unobstructed openings. So again, simplifying the model code language and then coming up with a common sense application for the requirement. Chapter 19, just wanted to point out one thing there, 1901.2, the ACI 318 iteration has been updated. So now we're going to be referencing the 2019 iteration of that. And that's pretty important, right? Anytime we're dealing with concrete design. So wanted to note that, again, aligning with the National Model Code. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll turn it back to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. Okay, so we have chapters 17 through 19. And just wanting to check with the board, see if there's any topics of discussion, or if we are again ready to continue forward. Good to go? All right. Okay. I think we're going to spend a lot of time on chapter 20. I'm just kidding. So there's nothing on chapter 20, Tony, unless there's something else there, but let me go ahead and have you cover whatever you feel is the next block. If it's chapters, whatever, 20 through 23, yeah, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So nothing to really highlight in 20 or even in 21. There was a public proposal in 21. It was approved by the committee. Some good engagement from industry on that, and came to the committee meeting and provided testimony, and some good discussion there. Maintaining some existing Oregon amendments, particularly regarding lap splices. Nothing in 22 for steel to note. On steel storage racks, there is now kind of more additional requirements specified, which is great because it comes up all of the time about cantilevered and, just typical steel storage racks. So we've added that there in 2209. In 23, the one thing I did want to point out is 230856. 2308-662 regarding cripple walls. The language there, this is something that aligns now with the recently adopted OSSC or 21 iteration. And this was proposed by Robert Rice here in Oregon and adopted at the model code level for both chapter 23 and then as well as chapter 6, on the IRC side. So just wanted to point that out again, clarifying there, and probably a fiscal savings on that one as compared to what was required previously. And so with that, that takes us through chapter 23. I'll turn it back to you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. Board, any comments or ready to move forward? Seeing the thumbs up on those. Okay, let's go ahead and let's cover chapters 25 through 30, and then we'll cover chapter 31. So Tony, please, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So we're going through not a lot in chapter 25. We jump 24, we jump 26. There was nothing there to note. 27, maintaining, again, kind of a balance here in Oregon, since we have an electrical board. We always have to pay attention to that when we're looking at national model codes, right? Because they're not aligned with our unique statutory construct here in Oregon. So there's always some effort there to make sure that anything that is dealing with electrical installations is adopted through the appropriate board, and not through this board, let's say. And so we're retaining some existing amendments on that. Chapter 28, some additional language. It's new language from the International Fire Code, and part of that, integration that we talked about when we covered chapter 4. And we're essentially going to send the majority of it over to the mechanical code, because that's where it should be. And Mr. Heizer from our team has been coordinating that with the mechanical board as well. Chapter 29, plumbing systems. A couple of things I just wanted to note right up front. 2901.1 scope. This is some flexibility language, existing long-standing flexibility language when it comes to plumbing fixture requirements for commercial buildings. And at the model code level, they dealt with non-gender specific configurations. And previously, we had, through this board, adopted some language that also provided the flexibility for those types of configurations. And so we're going a little bit further with that. So clearer options available through prescriptive application of Chapter 29. And then the next one I'd like to point out is 2902.3, employee and public toilet facilities. So a new amendment there, the model code provides some flexibility for, public areas that are small and intended for just, short visits by the public, such as, a pizza place where you go, you stop in, it's a very small public area and you're just picking up a pizza. And we provided some additional flexibility even further just to deal with things that maybe don't meet the dimensional limitations of the model code. I think it's 300 square feet of a public area. Because again, I mean, when we're talking about Chapter 29 in the context of the state building code, we're convenience toilets versus fire life safety. I think the intent is to be very flexible when it comes to application of Chapter 29. So moving through, nothing in Chapter 30 really to note. Again, they're longstanding amendments. We have a statewide elevator program, of course, here in Oregon. And so really just a lot of carve-outs and pointing to Chief Hartung and his program there. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll turn it back to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. Okay, board, we have just checking in if there's anything of these chapters that you would like to remove and discuss, or are we ready to move on? Okay, I think we are ready to move on. Okay, let's see. So we have Chapter 31 next, and again, we have one of the code change proposals in there that we have public testimony on. And so I think, Tony, let me check in with you real quick in terms of what's remaining. We have 32, 33, 34. And are you also going through the appendices as well?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I'm planning, again, it's at the pleasure of the board, but I plan to cover all of that, yes. And there's just several things to note, like in the appendices, for example, not much to note in 33 or 32, really. We have quite a bit in 31 and 34. There's some, big discussions, just kind of overarching concepts that I'd like to give the board, yeah.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is 31 and 34. We might need to just slow down just a bit and hear a little bit more in detail on those. If there are no objections from the board, what I would suggest, and Tony, let me know if there's more to explain from your perspective on the appendices, the statewide alternative methods. If there are no real further discussion items on those, what I would ask is to see if the board is comfortable with with us moving forward with thumbs up on everything except Chapter 31 and 34, and then circling back on those two chapters. Does that sound good to the board? Okay, all right. So Tony, did you track that okay as well?
I believe so, Mr. Chairman.
All right. So that said, it seems like right now our remaining items to discuss today and get through in terms of code change, adoption, and approval is Chapters 31 and 34. So Tony, I will defer to you which you would like to go first. If you want to go through Chapter 31, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So we'll start with Chapter 31. Right up front in 31, we have 3109 regarding swimming pools, spas, and hot tubs. And we've made some efforts at the division over the past couple of years to align more closely with some very specific statutory authority that DHS and OHA has regarding these swimming pools and construction of these pools. Our chief building officials have been doing some great work on engaging with those agencies, and we're working out the details through legal counsel really regarding the application of where does certain regulation stop and other regulation pick up. And so we're working on lining that out, but we have modified the longstanding 3109 as we currently understand it, and it may be subject to future kind of administrative cleanups and modification, depending on the results of those discussions with the other agencies and legal counsel. But I did want to note that, so same thing there as we've always had in the OSSC Chapter 31, 3109. Next, we get into 3111 for solar energy systems, and this is again what I referred to previously, where we have kind of merged the model code. We have the same location in 31 for solar energy systems, and then we've merged in our longstanding Oregon Solar Installation Specialty Code. It's gone through a number of updates over the past several cycles since 2015, since it was integrated into the body of the OSSC. And what we did here were just basically some updates to that in that line item 3111. Just some general updates. We wanted to clarify, the scope of the application of 3111, that, if you're designing and constructing under the residential code, that's good, that you don't have to take many of the steps that are required in 3111 generally of a commercial building. That would be subject to, Chapter 16 design requirements and similar. So just some general cleanup there before we get down to the prescriptive installations item a little bit further. So the next item will be that prescriptive installation, 3111-353, and some public proposals there, some general cleanup to the language. And the main recommendation, I believe, that we received, that your board received public testimony on previously, was regarding some engagement with Portland Fire and Rescue folks during the committee process in reference to that old Oregon Solar Installation Specialty Code had a commentary, and it's often used because we don't often have commentary specific for Oregon specific language. And so I think the reference and discussion at the committee level was to take that commentary that already existed even back in 2010 and include it, attach it to the associated definitions currently to provide some additional guidance to customers and to local government partners as well. There was some other general cleanup there. For the most part, everything was just outright clean and approved. There was a little bit of collaboration with SEAO and Amit from the city of Portland regarding some of the proposals, but really great work. We're going to have another figure proposed in that section, which will help folks. And then, like I said, general cleanup on that. If you'd like, at your pleasure, Mr. Chairman, I could pause there if you'd like, or I can cover the last couple of items in 31.
Please go ahead and cover the other two items, Tony, and then we will circle back and ask the board for specific questions they might have on any of these.
Absolutely, Mr. Chairman. So the next item on the list is 3111.4, solar ready construction. And so as it reads there in your matrix in the line item, this is based on the mandate from EO Executive Order 17-20 for solar ready construction for commercial buildings. So solar ready has been addressed on the residential code side. It is codified. It was an amendment to the 17 iteration and now is just part of the body of the 21 OSSC. And now this would be addressing all structures that aren't falling under the scope of the residential code. A lot of good collaboration on this language. It's using the National Model Code appendix as a base, and we can pull it up on the screen. We can talk about any of the specific provisions at the pleasure of the board, of course. And then there was that tied into the public proposal from SEAO regarding the roof dead load requirements. So pretty linear language, hopefully very application for folks regarding how to make that solar ready shown on the plans and compliant under the OSSC. And then finally, I wanted to point out 3114, just a good thing at the model code level. They have now introduced some basic provisions for intermodal shipping containers. They come up all of the time. So now there would be potentially a design compliance path, even on the residential code side through an R10411 approach. Maybe folks could point towards these provisions in 3114. And with that, Mr. Chairman, that takes care of Chapter 31. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Tony. I appreciate that summary. Terry Whitehill, I saw you came on the video. And your hand is raised. Do you have anything that you'd like to comment on specific of these proposals? I'm assuming perhaps the 3111 proposal or 5.3, the prescriptive.
Yeah, I just wanted to, the public comment talked about that we made a major change here. The truth is, when the commentary in that code was written, when it was moved into the OSSC, it was supposed to be moved in the exact same as what it was. But the way it's written, there's been, people aren't sure on how to do it. And I think there's been misapplication. And so we weren't bringing anything new. We were trying to bring clarification, the City of Portland Fire guys, of how that should be done. And that was part of the agreement that was worked out when that code was first established, with the fire group's real involvement in it. So it wasn't that we were proposing, that anybody was proposing a change. We were trying to make it more clear how it should be enforced all along.
Okay, thank you, Terry. And I guess just a follow-up question, Terry, for you is like the discussions amongst the committee with this code change proposal was it sounds like there was consensus support to move this forward.
I do believe that all the committee voted for it except for the solar person that was on the committee.
Okay, thank you. And Eric Sandoval, I saw your acknowledgement of that as well. I see a hand from Sarah Pavey. Sarah, if you would like to offer up some comments for the board, please go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm that solar person from the committee. And I just wanted to share that, like Angela said, of course, we want Portland Fire and Rescue to be safe on the roof. And when we were going back and forth on this topic, I was presenting some hypothetical roof situations and was told that that generally the issues that Portland was seeing were roofs that were so covered with solar, there was no safe way to do firefighting operations. And correct me if I'm wrong, Terry, that was the impression I took away from that, is that there are roofs that are super covered with solar, but still seem to meet that prescriptive path or the fire access pathways, other than the debate over what the adjacent roof definition is, right? Solar free or not solar free. And I think that really boils down to the greater than and less than 25% solar to roof area issue. Projects that have just a few panels on a roof and are less than 25% of that roof plan view, they leave a lot of roof for firefighting. So in a hypothetical roof, you may have just an east and west gable roof, and the best place for solar on that roof, on that house, is a little bit on the east and a little bit on the west. And but generally that roof is pretty wide open, 70, 80, 90% open, but there's just some panels on each side of this very basic, IHOP roof. Not so steep. But if we codify this requirement that solar have an adjacent roof that is completely solar free, then you only would have solar, say, on the west side, and that would reduce the amount of solar that you could put on that house. And these are smaller houses. They've got a lot of vent pipes. They've got trees. They've got obstructions that may not interfere with firefighting, but do interfere with solar or reduce the performance of the solar installation. Again, making it take a lot longer for that investment to pay off. And so I, along with Angela, we would like to see further, evaluation of this. Is it just the projects that are greater than 25%? Is it a 50% threshold? Is there another number where we cap it and say, well, above this percentage, you definitely need more pathways? Because looking at it the way we interpreted it until I was part of this committee and hearing this commentary, is that, yeah, you could fill up that roof and just have a 3-foot pathway to the 12-inch ridge offset, and that would really fill up the roof. And I can understand why that would be a safety issue. That would be a problem for firefighting. But these roofs with smaller systems, but systems that have a few panels on each roof section, they they need those roof sections to make that system worthwhile and to help offset their bills. And there's still a ton of roof for firefighting operations. 75% or more of the roof is unoccupied by solar.
Thank you, Sarah, for those comments. Gary.
Yeah, I guess without looking at the language, I'm having a relatively tough time following it. So either we need to look at the specific language that is causing the debate here, or we kick it back somewhere. Otherwise, I'm not sure if I can make an informed decision so far based upon the comments. What I've seen so far is a recommendation from the committee to approve all of them. But obviously, I want to be informed well enough. Is there a specific language that we can look at or put on the screen?
Thank you, Gary. Let me go ahead and let me just, before we do that, let me next go to Steve Forrester.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My comments are the exact same, just kind of like one of the previous proposals we dealt with is we don't have language in front of us, so I'm not sure what all we're actually are debating or approving or what the change was. So I think we would need more information.
Okay. Okay. Mr. Rocco, Tony, let me go to you real quick and see. I mean, we can certainly share the code language. I don't know, again, happy to look at that, but whether or not we're going to be able to work through that at this board today, but also want to go back to the code change committee itself in terms of the work that was done. And it sounds like all but one had kind of recommended approval in terms of the stakeholder involved. Is Eric Sandoval, I see your hand up, so go ahead.
Yes, Chairman Schmidt, the issues that were dialogued with in the committee had to do exactly with what Sarah had brought up and Terry had brought up, and my informed knowledge of what was going on basically had a transfer of review capability between the building department and the fire department. It allowed the fire department to have input into the discussion of where those solar panels were going to go so that there would be safe fire department operations during an event. And so to me, it was more about allowing that to continue in a way that was representative of that department and during the event than it was about the specific issues that Sarah was bringing up. So for me, if the public comment is of concern that we can't quite make that complete, even though the committee felt it was enough to make it work, and leaving the local jurisdiction to negotiate these items between building and fire and proponent. If we can't get there because there's still some anxiety or concern, then I think that we need to open it up to another way of getting that solved. In my opinion, it was already there. We were already enforcing it this way, much like Terry was talking about. We're just adding clarification. But it appears that there's some concern about either how that was implemented or that there's a fear that the implementation of that would cause some type of limitations on the installation, which I did not perceive during this method. So I guess to be fair and open, there should be some way of managing it. And if we already have enforcement capability, there really is no worry about not moving it forward today. We could move it forward at some other point because, as Terry said, it's already there. So I think that's what would be my recommendation, is to allow the public comment to enter into this dialogue before passing and moving it to a common dialogue location, whatever that is, work group or whatever, so that can be worked out, because it's probably inside of the commentary that the issue is located as opposed to the code language.
Okay, thank you, Eric. And that, I think you're suggesting a potential path that I was wondering about as well, is like, if this is already in place, in essence, for us to, the current language, how we work through this is already in place now. to codify it may not be necessarily like, you know, if we didn't do it today, it would be okay. Terry, you have a hand up?
Yeah, because that is the argument. The industry argues that we don't have the right to say this, and they look at it different than what the commentary pointed out. And we've typically called the commentary requirements because that when that was moved to the code, we were told that they were moving it over to be enforced the same way as what the commentary did. And so, but the industry has continually told us that they don't feel like we have the right to make that call, even though we use the commentary as what we use for our clarification on how to make the calls.
Okay. Sarah, I see your hand up. Please go ahead. Let's keep our comments as concise as we can, please.
Sure, of course. So one of the reasons that we really wanted to bring this up is in times past, in other jurisdictions, I've taken plans and said, this doesn't quite meet the exact fire path requirements, but will you be implementing firefighting? You know, how will you approach firefighting on this roof? And a fire official would say, based on these plans and based on this actual roof, your design is fine. Go ahead and install it as you'd like to, because we'll do different firefighting we'll have a different tactic on this roof. And so I mentioned that in our code review and asked, you know, are there exceptions? Do you ever grant exceptions? And correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe I was told that you can ask for an exception, but it is rarely, if ever, granted. So there doesn't appear to be a way to say, hey, there's 10% of this roof using solar, but it's on only 2 roof planes. Can we have an exception and actually, you know, use the roof for solar? And if the answer is you can ask, but we're always going to say no, then we need a different pathway to reasonably give people solar while still keeping that roof safe for fire.
Okay. Thank you, Sarah. Terry, again, yeah, if you could please keep your comments concise.
Yeah, no, we have an appeals process. We have granted exceptions at time. We're not usually seeing somebody just wanting to do 25% of the roof. They're usually trying to do a huge amount of the roof and count lower roof levels that don't even open into that attic space as part of the overall roof plan. That's what we mostly see, but we have granted exceptions at times, yes, and we will continue to do that.
Okay, thank you, Terry. Tony, let me ask you your opinion from your perspective. It does sound like this is a topic that could warrant some additional discussion, and so I think what I would ask is the divisions. I guess one from a timing standpoint. I know in terms of being able to process and prepare and get books printed, et cetera, this is probably not something that could wait for this specific code change item for the May 4th meeting. I assume that's too long. And that's okay. I think my question, with that assumption being true, is to ask then, if this does not go forward, what is the division's opinion on what that means in terms of just how jurisdictions work with industry going forward?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So if I could I share my screen and show you really show the entire board what the discussion is about? It's really defined terms that are in Chapter 2.
Yeah.
And then that commentary language. So I'd like to do that.
That would be great. Thank you.
Okay. Yep. So here we see it. It's in green. I'll try my best to zoom in for everyone. And I believe that this is, again, that at the committee level, there was some discussion about adding some clarification to the definition of solar roof. So if you looked at your 19 OSSC today, what you would see is just that language in blue there for the definition of a solar roof. The green language is adapted from that existing commentary to the Oregon Solar Installation Specialty Code. So if you pull up currently right now, the 2010 OSISC with commentary, you'll see essentially this language. And so this was the change, is codifying this as a defined term. In the body of 3111 in our prescriptive approach, nothing changed. It's just the application of these italicized defined terms. As far as firefighter pathways or anything related to those requirements, there were no changes, only some just editorial adjustments within the body. But here is the actual change that we're discussing. So hopefully that helps. From a timing standpoint, Mr. Chairman, as you touched on, I think we're already late. We're already behind as far as publishing is concerned. But again, just being a single defined term, there may be some potential there. But I think the May meeting would be late to answer your question.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Tony. Appreciate sharing the screen and walking us through that. So, board, let me have the discussion with you now in terms of what you're seeing here, and given the discussion, what is the thought from the board as we go forward? I guess based on what I just saw and with my limited knowledge of what I'm looking at, I could see at a minimum that there could be some benefit from some graphics that go along explaining the difference between solar roof and that kind of stuff. I think I could see some communication materials and things like that for best practices and consistency to be able to help provide building officials and industry some consistency on that. But that's, again, outside of the code itself. Gary, your hand's up. Go ahead.
Yeah, I appreciate, through the chair, appreciate Tony and Sarah, your comments, and I really want to be sensitive to the needs and the ability to install renewable energy on roofs. I guess after seeing this, and I would probably default to the wisdom of the majority of the review committee on this one, and would probably support approving this or recommending approval and moving it forward, and would hope that building departments would be sensitive and to work with installers in regards to solar installation. So I think I could support a motion to approve on this.
Okay, thank you, Gary. Marshall?
Thank you, Chair Schmidt. Just from what I saw, I kind of agree with Gary on this, in that I think I can support the expertise of folks that have put the work in on this. However, I do have some concerns in limiting solar panels on roofs, and I certainly want to be sure that we find a fine balance between promoting renewables and keeping our firefighters safe. With that in mind, I would have no issue moving forward with this language as of today, and then still convening a work group to go forward to have further discussions on this. I think we could do both, and then we can come back and amend this section if it comes up as something that really does need to be amended. But that would be my 2 cents on it.
Thank you, Marshall. Other comments and thoughts from the board? Okay, hearing none, I guess from my perspective, again, based on the conversations we've had and the information presented, I would also be comfortable moving forward with the code change. However, to Marshall's point, as well as what I brought up further about communications, I think there's some work that can be done. I don't know if it's a work group specifically, or if it's more of, again, in deference to the building divisions, just their own workload in terms of what's on their work plan for the year, as they could thread this into the conversation and their workload to maybe do a little bit more work on this and bring back a topic for an informational discussion or just a future discussion item with the board as an update, and a little bit more, based on the feedback and discussion today, what would they recommend in terms of developing kind of a consistent graphics and that kind of stuff, package information, so that we can help build as much consistency across the state on this as possible. Tony, you came back on. You have thoughts? Oh, okay.
Mr. Chairman.
All right, not a problem. I guess, again, we're not approving specifically, but we have been doing kind of the proverbial thumbs up. Based on this discussion, is there a consensus from the board to move forward with the proposed amendment at this point in time? Okay, I see that. Brenda, I'm sorry, you're good, Brenda? So, okay, excellent. Right. Sure whose audio that is. Okay, then we will, again, thank you, Sarah and Angela, for the comments. Thank you, Terry, for your comments as well on behalf of the code change committee. Again, I think we have some notes in the record here about some recommendations to BCD about some additional follow-up related to this. And then as this topic moves forward and evolves, if that topic comes back to the board, we can certainly have a more even more robust discussion about improvements going forward. Okay, with that, Tony, let me go ahead and move back over to you then. I think that said, is there anything else in chapter 31 that the board would like to discuss, or are we ready to move to chapter 34? And I'll do a thumbs up for going to 34. Okay, all right, Tony, let's go ahead and move on to chapter 34.
Great, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So chapter 34, we're proposing a hybrid approach, a little bit different. So as you recall, under the 19 OSSC, it was the first model code review where chapter 34 had been removed in its entirety at the national level. And so there were some choices there. And ultimately, the board chose to adopt the international existing building code and then keep amendments to it in chapter 34 of the OSSC. And what we're proposing going forward is to have an integrated version. The IEBC at the national level is actually, it's not a very long code. I think it's roughly what would be integrated, approximately 45 pages or so added to the OSSC. And that's the way we have it drafted for your review and consideration. And looking at your matrix starting on the bottom of page 19, I just wanted to highlight a couple of things. So we regarding the administrative provisions, the IEBC is a standalone code. So of course it has its chapter 1 and a chapter 2, so administration and definitions. And what we're doing there is we have some administrative language in 3401, and then with the rest of it will refer back to just chapter 1 of the OSSC. For definitions, we've moved all of those definitions recommended from the IEBC into the body of chapter 2 of the building code. So it's still the interplay between the two is still going to be a little bit different than at the national model level, but I think it should be much smoother for local government partners and customers as well. And on the IEBC level, if you look at chapter 3, so section 3403, and that's what we tried to do in this approach is it's a chapter 34, so then 3401 refers to chapter 1 of the IEBC, 3402 refers to chapter 2 of the IEBC, if that makes sense, going through the numbering in 34. So hopefully folks that reference a model commentary, things like that, they can quickly navigate to exactly where they would be in the IEBC. We look at 3403, that's the provisions for all compliance methods. The great thing about the IEBC is that it provides options, right? So we have prescriptive compliance, we have work area compliance, and then we have a performance method. And so all of those options are available for folks to choose from. And we went through and kind of vetted all of the language, included some specific Oregon amendments, particularly in the accessibility space. As you know, we have some guiding statutes here in ORS 447, regarding alignment with the federal ADA and then also the Fair Housing Act. And so some amendments there. I'm happy to bring up any of the chapter in its entirety at the board's pleasure. We can go through any of that. There were some discussions around repairs. One of those the board dealt with earlier in today's agenda. And then there were also some proposals, some great work by SEAO and our program engineer, Jeremy, coordinating on substantial damage and less than substantial structural damage. So you see that on your matrix. It's 3404521. Some really great efforts there. And we got to some clean code language addressing their concerns and kind of more alignment with the national model code versus the longstanding Oregon amendment that we had in place. The same flexibility is maintained for repair and reconstruction standards. Again, there's a lot of flexibility there. Determinations of dangerous, you still have to meet the structural criteria of chapter 4, IEBC chapter 4. As we move through there, a lot of just general editorial alignments There was one in the current 19 OSSC for historic buildings, which are specifically defined. There was kind of a limited path on what those customers had available to them as options. And through communication with City of Portland staff, Kathy in particular, we reassessed that and brought forward a different proposal to the committee regarding historic buildings. So now historic still have the same options as other building owners to go through that prescriptive, that work area, or possibly that performance option. And then as we kind of move through all of it, again, keeping alignment with the chapters, we'll have it integrated in the body of the code. There was comments you'll see noted below 3415, chapter 15. There were discussions at the committee level and a letter from the Structural Engineers Association of Oregon regarding some of the IEBC sections that are not adopted, and essentially our reading of statute, through our legal advice here at the division 45020 sub 4 and seismic rehabilitation. And so there was some discussion there. The letter is linked for your review, and there is a link directly to the committee meeting where we discussed it right up front. And I wanted to pass along that information here at the board level. I'm not sure the board is the proper arena to discuss readings of statute. But at this point, I think from the division standpoint, we've made our understanding pretty clear regarding seismic rehabilitation authority, and that it is outright afforded to local municipalities, and it is not under delegation of authority from the division. So you'll see that there. And then I know we touched on them earlier, but I wanted to cover appendices real quick just because we're on that page, if that's all right. At your pleasure, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Tony.
Thank you. Appendix C regarding agricultural buildings, that is adopted as part of the code, and some great amendments there based on legislative action. So you'll see we aligned it with statute. So some updates there to Appendix C, because it references back to obviously ORS 45315, and then it includes then the regulated ag buildings, Group U, where they aren't subject to that exemption under 315. And then also Appendix O, I just wanted to note performance-based application. So a codified reference to the ICC performance code, which is pretty exciting from where I sit. It really still follows the 10410, 10411 path as an alternate, but it does provide a potential option for folks rather than going through more prescriptive compliance option of the state building code. They could go through that performance design process. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to answer any questions. I'll turn it back to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Tony. Really appreciate all the summary today on these items. Let me go ahead and open it to the board for any comments or questions around Chapter 34 or the appendices or anything else left on there in terms of statewide alternative methods. Eric Sandoval.
Yes, Chair Eric Smith. I just wanted to make mention that when we went through 34, we asked in the committee, we asked a general question about the use of this and how that had been working in Oregon and the various committee members, and we had I thought we had good support of it and recommendation to continue using it this way. That the only issue was trying to bounce between the different numbers on the same section, and which has been changed here with this editorial work. So I still have great faith in this chapter to help work both to get things implemented, but also reduce the risk for those in Oregon for existing buildings. So very supportive of the work that's been done by the committee and mostly Building Codes Division here.
Okay, thank you, Eric. Other questions or comments on any of Chapter 34 or the appendices? Or do we have kind of the thumbs up about that we're good to go for these items discussed in this section? All right. Okay. Well, I don't see another page of matrix, so I think we're at the end. I think at this point in time, let me go ahead and open it up to the committee, or sorry, the board for any additional discussion? And if not, this item does require a motion, and motions in your packet if anybody so chooses. Don't be shy if there's anybody. Does anybody need that language? Eric Sandoval, please.
I think the closest recommendation is the middle one because there have been some amendments that we've made, and also there's some pieces of this that we've deferred to work group. I'm not exactly sure if this will work, but I could do the second one.
Actually, real quick, but I thank you for mentioning that, Eric. It was one of my questions as well. Is like we have a motion to approve or a motion to amend and approve, but we've also and it's kind of a blanket of all the committee recommendations. However, we've had two separate items today that we took, action on, and those weren't necessarily approved. Right? So, I guess let me go back to Tyler and or staff to see is it, assuming Mr. Sandoval's motion is going to be around approving this, except for some of these things that we did isolate on an isolated manner. What is the best motion language? Is that second motion about amending and approving per our discussions?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the board, if I may. I believe probably the cleanest way to capture the recommendations of the board based on its review and based on the individual items that were pulled out for work group or had an amendment as we went along would probably be to just say amend and approve based upon the board's recommendations, and I think that will capture everything that's happened up until now, and I don't think there will be any confusion on that basis because the division's been going along and keeping minutes based upon the board's recommendations for those specific items. So if you say amend and approve based on the board's recommendations and continue with the language that we've supplied there, I think that'll make sense.
Okay, thank you, Tyler. Eric, does that help you then to be able to make the motion that you would like to?
Yes, it does. Okay. I think my mic's still on. Yes. Okay.
Yes, go ahead.
So I make a recommendation to amend and approve the board recommendations and forward to the administrator for rulemaking and subsequent adoption with the finding that the added costs, if any, are necessary to the health and safety of the occupants or the public or necessary to conserve scarce resources.
Okay, thank you, Eric, for that. That's a motion there. Let me just check in real quick from staff. Is there any concerns with that motion? Anything that needs to be wordsmithed on that? I see the administrator thumbs up, so thank you very much. So we have a motion on the floor to amend and approve based on the board's recommendations. And so with that, I will call upon Melissa to please do a roll call.
Yes, Mr. Chair. Stephen Forster.
Yay.
Brenda Hartzog.
Yes.
Gary Hakinen.
Yes.
Marshall McGrady.
Yes.
Randy Samuelson.
Yes, sorry.
Eric Sandoval.
Yes.
Vice Chair Andrew Dykman.
Yay.
Chair Eric Schmidt.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you very much. And let me just, I know I believe I'm speaking on behalf of the board when I say our heartfelt thanks for everybody's work. This is an incredible amount of work that goes into the code change process. So very, very thankful for the work of the code change committee, building codes division staff, all that participated in this process these many months. So again, thank you very much for everybody's efforts on this.
I know we don't usually get a second, but I second that, Eric.
Okay, no, that's great. Thank you, Andrew. I appreciate that. Absolutely. Okay, that's great. All right. Well, with that, we're going to move to the next item on the agenda, which is announcements. So I'll just open it up to everybody. And before we do that, I will just clarify now that based on, unless you guys want to meet next week, we don't have to. We no longer will need a meeting on February 9th. So again, our next regular board meeting will be May 4th, 2022. So I wanted to make that announcement. Other than that, let me open it up to the floor if there are any additional announcements from any board members. Okay, seeing none. And all right, well, wow. I think, Gary, I'm going to go back to you were wondering how this was going to go today. Here we are, and we're just getting in right before the lunch hour. So
I would say excellently done, Chair Schmidt.
Well, no, it's everybody. Thank you, but no, it's everybody. So appreciate everybody's time today, and as always, great work on this. And I know we couldn't have done this as efficiently again if we didn't have the talented code review committee and the talented BCD staff really helping us on this. So great work, everybody. At this point in time, I will go ahead and if there's no further business, I'm going to announce that the meeting is adjourned. And the time now is 11:59 a.m. Have a good lunch hour and have a good rest of the week. Take care, everybody.
Thank you all.